Across the galaxy, billions of screens lit up with one shocking headline: "Watch right now. I took her from behind, and my alien maid clenched around me without warning." The words spread faster than fire. Whole cities paused. Soldiers stopped in barracks. Merchants froze in marketplaces. Even children leaned closer to glowing hollow screens, their curious eyes wide. The title was crude, wild, and impossible to ignore. Many expected something shameful, something dirty. But when the first viewers clicked and the video began to play, silence followed. It was not what they thought. The recording came from the helmet camera of a human soldier, David Keller. And the alien maid was not part of any twisted story. She was Leora, a Zalari woman who had lived as a domestic worker in the colonies. The camera shook violently in the opening seconds. Explosions thundered in the distance. Fire painted the sky red. Buildings crumbled like toys. David was seen running through clouds of smoke, his breathing harsh inside his helmet. And on his back, clinging tightly, claws dug into his armor, was Leora. The clenching was not of desire. It was of terror. Her body pressed against his as he carried her through collapsing ruins, shielding her from every blast. And when a shockwave struck from behind, David turned, took the hit himself, and nearly fell. He staggered but did not let her slip. The force pushed them forward, dust choking the air, but his arms never loosened around her legs. Viewers watched in stunned silence. The title had promised scandal, but what they saw instead was sacrifice. David Keller was no hero in the stories told before this day. He was just another soldier far from home, stationed on the Zalari colony world of Miras 4. He had been assigned there because humans had recently begun sharing colonies with other species, trying to prove themselves as equal partners in the Galactic Council. Many aliens still saw humans as reckless newcomers, strong in spirit but foolish in heart. David's quarters were simple. He lived alone, though he had one companion, Leora. She was quiet, graceful, and always careful to stay out of his way. Her large, dark eyes carried centuries of sorrow, the kind born from generations of her people being treated as servants. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. She cleaned, cooked, and kept the small living space neat. David never treated her cruelly, but he also never truly knew her. She was like a shadow in his home, moving silently, existing without voice, until the day the invasion came. The video showed the city falling. An enemy fleet had attacked without warning. Air sirens wailed, lights flickered, and people screamed in the streets. David had been ordered to regroup with his squad, but instead he turned back. "Leora," he muttered through gritted teeth as the camera shook. "She's still inside. No one else would have gone." Servants were not considered worth saving, not by the council, not by her own people. But David did not hesitate. He forced his way through falling beams, fire licking the walls. The camera caught a glimpse of her. Leora crouched under a broken support beam, trembling, her silver skin streaked with soot. She looked up as David appeared. "You came back?" Her voice shook, almost broken. "Of course I did," David answered, throwing his rifle aside to lift the beam. Muscles strained, metal groaned, and at last the weight shifted enough for her to crawl free. Without waiting, he scooped her up, slung her over his back, and began to run. It was then that she clutched him tightly. Her hands, sharp and clawed, dug into his armor. Her whole body shivered with fear, wrapping around him as if letting go meant death. That was the moment the title described. Misunderstood, twisted, but real. The recording continued. Buildings fell around them. Dust filled every corner. David's voice was heard through the static. "Hold on. Don't let go. I've got you." Leora whimpered softly, a sound so alien yet so human at the same time. "Why? Why risk this for me?" David didn't answer. He just kept running, coughing from the smoke, pushing forward through streets that no longer looked like streets. He shielded her every time debris rained from above. He placed himself between her and danger again and again. At one point, an explosion hit directly behind them. The force lifted them both off the ground. David twisted in midair so his body struck the stone first, protecting hers. His helmet cracked, the feed blurring for a second, but he rose again, carrying her still. Viewers gasped as they watched. To most alien societies, this was madness. Protecting a servant at the cost of one's own life was unthinkable. Logic said save the soldier, leave the maid. But humans did not always follow logic, and in that there was something frightening and something beautiful. The video ended with David finally reaching an evacuation zone. He stumbled, nearly fell, but did not drop her. Troopers rushed forward, shouting for him to board. His voice, weak but steady, was heard one last time. "She's safe. She's safe." And then the screen went black. In the moments after the video spread, the galaxy shook. Alien commentators argued furiously. Some mocked it as human weakness. Others whispered it might be strength. Some laughed at the title, calling it a cheap trick to lure views, but most fell silent after watching. Because behind the chaos, behind the crude words, there was something undeniable. A human had chosen to save someone no one else would. For Leora, it was more than survival. It was the first time anyone had ever seen her not as a servant, but as a life worth protecting. And for the galaxy, it was the first time they began to understand what made humans different. That was how it began. One soldier, one maid, misunderstood title, and a story that would change everything. The city of Mirrors 4 burned like a dying star. Streets once filled with laughter were now rivers of smoke and fire. Towers of glass and steel cracked, their shadows falling across the ground. Sirens wailed, but their voices were drowned by the sound of explosions. Through this chaos, one human soldier ran. His name was David Keller, and on his back clung the trembling figure of Leora, his alien maid. The video that would one day become famous had already captured this moment, but living through it was far worse than watching. Every breath David took felt heavy. Every step was against fire, rubble, and falling stone. But still he did not stop. Leora pressed her face against his shoulder. She was Zilari, a race known for their grace, their long limbs, and their silver-blue skin that shimmered faintly under light. But now she looked nothing like the dignified servants the galaxy knew. Her face was covered in ash. Her body shook with fear. Her long fingers, tipped with claws, clung so tightly to his armor that sparks scratched against the metal. "David," her voice cracked. "You should have left me. You were ordered to leave." David coughed against the smoke, refusing to slow. "Orders can wait." "You can't." Leora could not understand it. For her people, servants were never rescued first. They were replaceable, like broken tools. She had grown up believing that her life was less, that her duty was only to obey. And yet here was this strange human ignoring orders, risking his life just to carry her. Her heart ached with confusion. The streets were full of screams. Families ran, soldiers shouted, and machines of war marched between the flames. The enemy had come with precision and cruelty, striking without warning. As David ran, his boots slipped on the broken stones. A blast roared nearby, throwing a wave of heat that singed his uniform. He tightened his grip around Leora's legs. "Hold on," he shouted, though his voice was hoarse. She squeezed harder, claws digging deeper. It was not desire. It was not instinct. It was desperation. If she let go, she would die. And she realized so would he. The camera caught every moment, the sudden turn of David's head as debris fell from above, the way he hunched forward to shield her, the hiss of pain as a sharp edge cut across his back armor, his grunts of effort, her soft sobs. These sounds spread across the galaxy later, touching hearts that had never cared for servants before. But in that moment, they were alone in the fire. At one corner, a beam of steel blocked their path. David set Leora down gently, his body trembling with exhaustion. "Stay behind me," he ordered. She obeyed, though her body refused to stop shaking. He grabbed the beam, muscles straining, veins rising against his skin. The metal groaned, refusing to move. Leora stared, her chest tight. No one had ever strained so hard. For her. Finally, with one desperate roar, David lifted the beam enough for her to crawl under. She hesitated. "Go," he shouted. She slid across the ash, her skin scraping against stone. When she rose on the other side, she turned back, eyes wide with fear. He had dropped the beam with a crash, his shoulders sagging, his body shaking. Yet he smiled weakly. "See? Easy." They continued forward, step by step through collapsing alleys and burning streets. Soldiers passed them, some staring in confusion, others shaking their heads. To them, he was wasting time. But David ignored them all. Leora finally whispered, her voice breaking. "Why me?" David kept running, his jaw tight. "Because you're here, and that's enough." She blinked, not understanding. For her people, value came from rank, wealth, and power. But David's words were simple. They cut deeper than fire. At last, the evacuation zone came into sight. A wide plaza where shuttles waited, engines glowing, soldiers forming lines. Hope surged in Leora's chest. But before they could reach it, the ground shook again. An enemy artillery strike slammed into the plaza's edge. Fire and stone burst into the air. The shockwave hit them from behind, throwing both off balance. David twisted in midair, clutching Leora close. His back struck the ground first. Pain tore through his body, but he held her tightly, protecting her. The camera cracked, the screen blurring, but the audio carried his groan. "Stay with me. Stay with me." Leora's arms wrapped around him. She pressed her forehead against his chest, trembling. For a moment, she thought he would not rise again. But then he pushed himself up, blood on his lips, and staggered forward, step by step. One soldier carrying one maid. The plaza was chaos. Soldiers shouted, civilians screamed, engines roared. Medical teams rushed to help the wounded. When they saw David stumbling in with Leora clinging to him, voices cried out, "Get him to the shuttle. He's bleeding. Over here!" But David only whispered, "She's safe. That's what matters. She's safe." Then his legs gave out and he collapsed. Leora screamed his name, clutching him, refusing to let go. Her tears stained his torn armor. She had never cried before in front of others. But now she did not care. Humans around her did not laugh. They did not call it weakness. They understood the video ended there. But for those who watched across the galaxy, the story was only beginning. They saw not lust, not weakness, not shame. They saw sacrifice. They saw something alien to them but natural to humans. And for Leora, in that moment, a seed was planted inside her heart. A seed of doubt about everything she had been taught. Maybe she was not less. Maybe her life was worth something because one man had risked everything to prove it, and that was only the beginning of their story. The footage did not stay on Mirror 4. Within hours, it spread across the entire galactic network. What had begun as a desperate rescue became the most watched recording in history, and it all carried the strange title, "Watch Right Now, I Took Her From Behind and My Alien Maid Clenched Around Me Without Warning." Aliens laughed at the words at first. They expected something vulgar, something shameful, but when they watched, their laughter died. Silence followed. Across the Zalari homeworlds, nobles sat stiff in their shining halls. They watched David's body shield Leora from falling stone. They watched him bleed while carrying her. They listened as his voice broke through static. "Hold on. Don't let go. I've got you," some nobles scoffed. Foolish human. Risking his life for a maid? Absurd. Others frowned, uneasy. Deep inside, something stirred. An old memory, perhaps. A memory of what life had been before servants, before castes, before chains. The common Zalari, workers, servants, the forgotten, reacted differently. They wept. For the first time, they saw one of their kind treated as precious, treated as if her life had meaning beyond service. They whispered Leora's name like a prayer. On distant worlds, other species debated fiercely. The warlike Gorak growled in disdain. Waste of strength. He should have saved himself. That is how warriors survive. The merchants of the Arali clicked their tongues. Illogical. Servants can be bought again, soldiers cannot. But then came softer voices, from those who had never spoken before. What if they are right? What if every life matters? The debate grew so loud it shook council chambers across the galaxy. Meanwhile, in the recovery tents of Mirror 4, David lay unconscious. His armor had been torn apart, his ribs cracked, his back bruised with burns. Machines hummed softly around him, keeping his body alive. And beside him sat Leora. She had refused to leave. Medical officers had tried to pull her away, but her hands gripped his too tightly. Her silver-blue skin was bruised, her body still aching, but she did not care. She sat there hour after hour, her large eyes staring at the human who had saved her. Her mind was full of storms. She had lived her entire life believing she was nothing, a servant, a tool, a shadow. Her choices had never mattered. But now this man had fought the fire for her. He had turned against orders for her. He had carried her when no one else would have. She could not understand why. And yet she could not let go. When the news reached the human fleets, reactions were mixed. Some soldiers laughed at the ridiculous title. Some shook their heads, muttering that Keller had broken orders. But many others, quiet, hardened warriors, felt pride. "That's what we do," one whispered. "That's what makes us human," another replied. Even far away on Earth, families who had lost sons and daughters to war watched the video. Mothers cried softly. Fathers clenched fists, children asked questions, and all of them felt the same strange mix of sorrow and pride. But not everyone celebrated. In the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, alien leaders demanded answers. A tall senator with scaled skin hissed, "Why do humans behave this way? Risking military assets for servants? It is madness." The human ambassador, a woman named Sarah Dorn, rose from her seat. Her voice was calm but firm. "Because to us no one is lesser. If you live, if you breathe, you are worth saving." The chamber erupted with shouts. Some called it weakness, some called it chaos. Others, in whispers too soft for their leaders to hear, called it hope. Back in the medical tent, David stirred. His eyes opened slowly, pain clouding his vision, and the first thing he saw was Leora holding his hand. "Leora!" His voice cracked. She gasped, tears rising instantly. "You're alive. You came back." He tried to smile, though his lips trembled. "Of course I did." She lowered her head, her voice breaking. "But why?" "I am nothing. I am only a maid." His fingers twitched against hers, weak but stubborn. "You're alive. That's enough." Her tears fell onto his hand. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken those words to her, and she believed them. The galaxy could not stop talking. Every broadcast, every holoscreen, every discussion carried the same footage. The title that once sounded crude now became legend. Children on distant colonies repeated David's words, "I've got you." Workers in factories whispered Leora's name, dreaming of freedom. Even some alien leaders began to wonder if humanity's way was not weakness, but strength, because humans were strange. They did not measure value the same way. They would fight, bleed, and even die for someone the rest of the galaxy would throw away. And in that difference, the galaxy began to tremble. But for Leora, none of this mattered yet. She sat beside David's bed, her heart full of feelings she had no words for. Gratitude, fear, confusion, and something else, a spark of something new. She had been saved. She had been chosen. And for the first time she began to wonder, what if her life had always been worth something? What if she was more than a servant? What if she too could choose? The galaxy debated, councils argued, and millions watched the video again and again. But for David and Leora, the story was only beginning. The field hospital on Miras 4 was filled with the smell of smoke, medicine, and fear. Rows of wounded soldiers lay on stretchers, their bodies wrapped in bandages, their faces pale from exhaustion. Doctors and nurses moved quickly, voices rising in urgency, machines beeping in rhythm with fragile lives. Among the wounded was David Keller. His body was covered in burns and cuts, his ribs were cracked, his back bruised, and his armor had been torn apart. He looked less like a soldier and more like a broken man who had carried too much weight. Beside him sat Leora. She had refused to leave. Even when officers told her she was only a maid and had no right to stay in the medical wing, she held his hand tighter, her eyes burning with defiance. "No," she said firmly, her voice trembling yet strong. "He saved me. I will not leave him." And so she remained, a silent shadow by his side, watching every rise and fall of his chest, listening to every weak sound of his breathing. Hours passed, Leora's heart beat in fear. She had never prayed before. Her people were not taught to pray for servants. But now every breath she took was a silent wish. "Please live. Please don't leave me." At last his eyes flickered open. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head. "Leora," he whispered. She gasped, her claws curling around his hand. "You're awake. You're alive." He tried to smile, though his lips trembled. "Told you. I don't break that easy." Her tears fell freely, rolling down her silver-blue cheeks. For the first time in her life, she cried not from fear but from relief. She leaned closer, her voice breaking. "You should not have risked yourself. You should not have come back for me." David coughed weakly, shaking his head. "Of course I did. I couldn't leave you there." Her eyes widened. "But why?" "I am just a maid. I am nothing." His gaze softened. "You're alive. That's enough for me." Those simple words struck her deeper than any blade. She lowered her head, tears dripping onto his arm. In that moment, something inside her began to change. Outside, the world debated. Inside the hospital tent, it was only the two of them. As David drifted in and out of sleep, Leora never let go of his hand. She remembered every moment of the rescue, the fire, the smoke, the way he shielded her, the way he carried her even when his own strength failed. Every time she replayed it in her mind, her heart tightened with something she could not explain. Was it gratitude? Was it guilt? Or was it something new? Something she had never allowed herself to feel. She did not know, but she knew she could not lose him. The days passed slowly. David's wounds healed with human medicine, but pain lingered. Each time he opened his eyes, he found Leora there, her gaze steady, her hand wrapped around his. One night, when the camp outside was quiet, he woke to find her still watching him. The stars above shone through the tent's thin fabric, casting silver light across her face. "You should sleep," he whispered. She shook her head. "I will not leave you. Not again." He tried to laugh, though it hurt. "You talk like I'm already gone." Her voice trembled. "You almost were. I thought I had lost you." He looked at her then, not as a maid, not as a servant, but as a person. And he realized how much fear lived inside her, how much she had been forced to hide all her life. He wanted to take that fear away. "Hey," he said softly. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her head and pressed her forehead gently against his chest. For her people, this was a gesture of trust, something she had never given to anyone. David's hand, though weak, lifted slowly and rested on her shoulder. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, something that neither of them fully understood yet. The galaxy outside continued to roar with debates. News channels replayed the footage endlessly. Some called David a hero, others called him reckless. Some mocked the title, others turned it into a banner of change. But for David and Leora, the world outside did not matter. All that mattered was the bond that had formed in fire and blood. For Leora, it was the first time she had been seen as more than a tool. For David, it was the first time he had risked everything, not for duty, but for someone's life, because that life mattered to him. One evening, as soldiers prepared for another attack outside, David turned to her again. His voice was weak but steady. "You're free now, Leora. You don't belong to anyone." "Not anymore," she froze, staring at him in shock. Her whole life had been chains she could not see, rules she could not break. The word free was like a dream she had never dared to dream. Tears filled her eyes again. "Free? What do I do with freedom?" He smiled faintly. "Anything you want." Her hands trembled. For the first time, she realized she could choose. And in that moment, she made her choice. She gripped his hand tighter, her voice firm despite her tears. "Then let me stay. Not as your maid. Not as your servant, but as someone who owes you her life." His tired eyes searched hers. He nodded slowly, understanding what she meant. "Then stay." That night, as the camp buzzed with noise and the stars burned above, Leora sat beside him, her heart no longer the same as it once was. She was no longer just a maid. She was someone who had been saved. Someone who had been chosen. Someone who had been given freedom, and she had chosen to stay by his side. It was the turning point, not just for them, but for the galaxy. For what started as one rescue, one soldier carrying one maid, would soon ignite a fire that no council could put out, and neither of them yet knew how much their bond would change the stars. The galaxy was restless. Screens glowed in every city, every station, every council hall. The same video played again and again. A human soldier carrying a Zalari maid through fire, shielding her from destruction, refusing to let her die, and the title that confused so many still appeared above it. "Watch right now." I took her from behind, and my alien maid clenched around me without warning. Some laughed at the crude words, some mocked, but few could look away. Because behind the strange title was something undeniable, something powerful. On the Zalari homeworlds, servants huddled together in silence as the video played. For generations they had been told their lives were worth nothing. They had been taught that only nobles mattered, that only masters deserved saving. But now they saw one of their kind carried like treasure by a human soldier who risked his life without hesitation. Whispers began, soft at first, then louder. "If a human can see us as worthy, why not our own people? Maybe we are more than servants. Maybe we are alive too." The nobles in their shining towers felt unease. Their servants' eyes had changed, no longer dull and obedient, but bright with a strange fire, the fire of hope. In the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, the argument turned fierce. The council was a vast circular hall filled with representatives of every major species. Their voices rose like storms as the video played on a massive screen in the center. A scaled senator from the Drath hissed loudly, his voice full of contempt. "This is weakness. Humans risk their soldiers for slaves. Such chaos cannot be allowed." A Gorak warlord slammed his armored fist onto the table. A true warrior saves himself, not his baggage. This human deserves no honor. But then, a quiet voice came from the Orali merchant delegate, whose insect-like antenna twitched nervously. "And yet, their colonies prosper, their people unite. Perhaps it is not weakness, but strength. A kind of strength we do not understand." The chamber erupted again. Shouts echoed from every side. At last, the human ambassador, Sarah Dorn, stood. Her dark eyes were calm, her voice steady as she faced the storm. "You ask why our soldier risked his life for a maid," she began. "The answer is simple. Because to us no one is lesser. If you live, you are worth saving." The chamber froze, then chaos returned. Some shouted insults, some laughed bitterly, others fell into thoughtful silence. The council had heard many words before, but none that shook their order so deeply. Far away in the quiet recovery tent on Miras IV, David Keller still lay healing. He did not know how famous he had become. He did not know that his rescue had reached every corner of the galaxy, but Leora knew. Soldiers who passed their tent whispered about it. Nurses stared with awe. Even aliens who once ignored her now looked at her with strange respect. She felt overwhelmed. She had lived her whole life unseen, unvalued, yet now the galaxy saw her, because of him. She looked at David, still weak but breathing, and her heart tightened. He does not even know what he has done, she thought, but I will never forget. Across the stars, cracks began to show. On colonies where humans lived beside aliens, servants began asking questions. Why do humans eat beside their workers? Why do humans risk their lives for one another, regardless of rank? Why do humans speak the word equal with such weight? Some alien masters grew angry. They warned their servants not to dream foolish dreams. But the dreams had already begun, and dreams are hard to kill. Back in the council chambers, new debates began. The scaled Drath senator sneered at the human ambassador. "If you spread such ideas, you will collapse every caste, every chain of order we have built. You will turn the galaxy upside down." Sarah Dorn did not flinch. "Perhaps it needs turning. Perhaps your chains are not order, but fear." The words echoed through the hall like thunder. Some races left in anger. Others lingered, their hearts troubled. And in the silence of their private chambers, even the most powerful rulers asked themselves, what if the humans are right? Meanwhile, in the camps of Miras IV, soldiers gathered around fires. Many were exhausted, wounded, and scarred. Yet they spoke of David's act as if it were legend. "That's what it means to be human," one soldier said, staring into the flames. "Yeah," another replied, his voice heavy with pride. "We fight for each other. Not just for orders, not just for power. For each other." Leora overheard these words one night. Her chest tightened. She finally understood what made them different. Humans were not bound by cold logic. They followed something else, something stronger. She whispered to herself, "They fight because they care." But while many admired the humans, others began to fear them more than ever. If humans could inspire hope in servants, if they could awaken thoughts of freedom where none existed before, then humans were not just soldiers or colonists. They were a spark. A dangerous spark that could burn across every world. And sparks once lit are hard to extinguish. In the quiet of the hospital tent, David woke again. His voice was weak, but his eyes searched for her. "Leora?" She was there, holding his hand as always. Her eyes softened. "I'm here. I will not leave," he smiled faintly. "Good, because I'm not done yet." She tilted her head, confused. "Not done with what?" His gaze grew distant but determined. "With proving that every life matters. Not just on paper, not just in speeches, in action." Her throat tightened. He did not know it, but his words were already echoing across the stars. She lowered her head and whispered, "Then I will stay by your side. Not as a maid, not as a servant, but as someone who chooses." David closed his eyes, his hand still wrapped in hers, and though the galaxy roared with argument and fear, in that small tent there was only peace. The galaxy was changing, slowly, painfully, but undeniably, and it had begun with one soldier, one maid, and one choice made in fire. The days passed slowly in the recovery camp. The war on Miras 4 was ending, but the memories still burned in the hearts of those who survived. Smoke rose in the distance, soldiers limped through the mud, and the wounded filled every corner of the tents. David Keller lay in his cot, his body healing but his spirit restless. His ribs ached with every breath, yet he refused to stay still. Each time a nurse told him to rest, he pushed back. Deep inside, he feared that if he stopped moving, if he stopped trying, everything he had fought for would fade. And always beside him was Leora. She no longer sat with her head bowed like a servant. She moved with a quiet strength, her golden eyes lifting to meet those who passed by. When soldiers came to check on David, she stood tall beside him. She spoke when spoken to. She even smiled sometimes, though the smile was fragile, like glass learning not to break. One morning, as sunlight broke through the thin fabric of the tent, David tried to sit up on his own. Pain flared through his chest and his hand trembled against the cot frame. "Don't," Leora said quickly, rushing to steady him. He gritted his teeth. "I can't just lie here. There's still work to do." She frowned, her hand firm against his shoulder. "Your body needs time. Even a soldier cannot fight when broken." Her words carried weight, not as a servant giving orders, but as someone who cared. David looked at her for a long moment, then let out a tired laugh. "You sound more like my commander than a maid." Something shifted in her eyes. She lowered her gaze, but not in shame. "I am not your maid anymore," she whispered. David's chest tightened. He had wanted her to believe that, but hearing it from her own lips made it real. "You're right," he said softly. "You're Leora, nothing less." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said her name with such meaning. Word of their story spread further. Soldiers from other units came to see the maid who was saved and the human who carried her through fire. Some brought food, some brought gifts, though David refused special treatment. Still, the attention made Leora uneasy. "They look at me as if I am something rare," she confessed one night, sitting beside David's cot. "But I am just one among thousands. Why should they care for me?" David turned his head to face her, his eyes steady. "Because you remind them what matters. You show them that none of this—" He gestured at the weapons stacked outside, the endless rows of cots, the banners of armies. "Means anything if we forget the lives we fight for." Her eyes glistened. "You speak as if I am a symbol." "You are," David said. "But you're also more than that. You're yourself, and that's enough." Outside the camp, the galaxy trembled. News reports spread of Zilari servants refusing to kneel, of colonies where workers walked away from their masters. In some places, protests were crushed with blood. In others, rulers found themselves unable to stop the tide of change. The Human Council tried to calm the storm. They insisted they were not here to destroy alien traditions, only to protect freedom. But their words could not erase the image already burned into every mind. A soldier carrying a maid as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The image spread like wildfire, stronger than speeches, stronger than law. One night, David awoke to find Leora sitting alone, staring at her hands. Her fingers trembled as she pressed them together, as if she was trying to hold something invisible. He spoke softly. "Can't sleep." She shook her head. "I keep thinking. My whole life I was told my choices meant nothing. I served, I obeyed, I stayed silent. But now they ask me what I want, and I don't know." Her voice broke, heavy with fear and wonder. "What if I am not ready to be free?" David pushed himself up despite the pain. He reached out and took her hand, steadying it. His grip was warm, strong, alive. "Freedom isn't about being ready," he said. "It's about deciding even when you're afraid. You don't have to know everything right now. You just have to choose, step by step, and I'll walk with you." Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever offered to walk with her. Slowly, she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his hand. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent but full of meaning. The next day, Leora stood outside the tent when a group of alien servants approached her. They were timid, their clothes ragged, their eyes shifting nervously. One of them, a young Zilari boy, spoke in a hushed voice. "Is it true? That you were saved? That a human carried you?" Leora hesitated. She felt their eyes on her, full of desperate hope. Her old self would have lowered her head, denied it, and stepped aside. But now she remembered David's words. "You're Leora, nothing less." She lifted her chin. "Yes, it is true. The servants gasped softly. Some whispered prayers, others clutched each other's hands. One of them asked, "Then, are we worth saving too?" Leora's heart pounded. She looked at their frightened faces, saw her own past in their eyes, and for the first time she answered with strength. "Yes," she said, "all of us are." From that moment, Leora was no longer just the maid who was saved. She became a voice, small at first, trembling but growing stronger each day. She spoke to servants in whispers, reminding them they were alive, reminding them they mattered. David watched her with quiet pride. His body still ached, but his spirit was steady. He saw in her the spark of something greater than himself. He thought, maybe this is what humanity was meant to bring. Not weapons, not conquest, but courage, the courage to believe in worth where no one else does. That night, as the stars stretched endless above the camp, Leora sat beside David again. "You gave me a gift I never asked for," she said softly. "What gift?" he asked. "The chance to be more than a shadow. The chance to stand." David shook his head, his eyes warm. "No, Leora, that was always inside you. I just reminded you it was there." She looked at him for a long time, her chest heavy with unspoken feelings. Then, with a trembling voice, she whispered, "Then I will never leave your side. Not as a servant, not as a symbol, but as someone who chooses you." David's breath caught. He had faced fire, pain, and death, but nothing had struck his heart like those words. He squeezed her hand gently, his voice low but full of promise. "And I choose you too." The galaxy raged with fear, with change, with fire and blood. But in that small camp under the endless stars, two souls had chosen each other, and sometimes that is enough to change everything. The galaxy had changed, and everyone could feel it. From crowded spaceports to noble palaces, from mining camps to battlefronts, the same whispers spread. A human soldier carried a maid through fire, and she rose to speak as more than a servant. What began as one moment of courage had become something far larger. Servants across worlds began to raise their heads. Some only dared to look their masters in the eye. Others dared more. They walked away, they spoke back, they demanded to be seen. And everywhere, rulers trembled. On Miras 4, David Keller finally stood without pain. His wounds had closed, though the scars would remain. But scars, he thought, were proof of survival. Beside him, Leora no longer walked with her head low. She no longer moved like someone waiting for commands. She walked beside him as an equal, her golden eyes steady, her step sure. Together, they left the medical camp not as soldier and maid, but as two people bound by something greater: choice. The soldiers saluted him as he passed, but many also nodded respectfully at her. That small gesture meant more than any medal. The human council soon called David to speak. They wanted his voice, his story, his presence. His act had become too large to contain. He was no longer only a soldier, he was a symbol. David hated the idea of standing in front of cameras, but he knew it mattered. He had carried one life from the fire, and now somehow the galaxy wanted him to explain why. When he told Leora about the speech, she froze. Her hands trembled. "You want me there?" she asked softly. He looked at her and nodded without hesitation. "Of course. This isn't just my story. It's ours." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said that to her before. The chamber of the Galactic Council was larger than any battlefield David had seen. Representatives of hundreds of species filled the tiers, their voices buzzing like a storm. Reporters hovered with drones, their lights flashing. When David stepped into the center, silence fell. Cameras turned, eyes sharpened. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, Leora walked beside him. Gasps rippled through the chamber. For the first time, a Zilari maid stood not in the shadows but in the center. Not as property, not as background, but as herself. David began to speak. "I am no leader. I am no ruler. I am a soldier. And I did what any human should do. I saved a life because life is worth saving." His voice was steady, but the hall buzzed with murmurs. Some nodded, some scoffed. He continued stronger now. "You ask why I risked myself for her. I ask you, why wouldn't I? Is she less alive than me? Does her heart beat softer than mine? Does she bleed a weaker red?" Silence spread. Even those who despised humans could not look away. David then turned to Leora. His eyes softened. "But I should not be the one to explain her worth. She can speak for herself." He stepped back and the galaxy saw what no one expected. a maid stepping forward to speak her truth. Leora's knees shook, but she did not bow. She looked up at the countless eyes fixed on her and forced her voice to rise. I was born to serve. I was told my choices were dust. My name was a whisper, my worth nothing. But one human carried me through fire. He did not see a servant. He saw me. Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. Now I know I am alive. I know I matter. And if I matter, then so do all who have been silenced, all who have been forgotten. We are not shadows. We are not tools. We are life. The chamber shook with uproar. Some shouted in anger, some in awe. Some slammed their fists against tables. Others wept quietly in their seats, but no one could deny her. After the speech, chaos spread. Some worlds tightened their chains, desperate to hold power. Others loosened them, afraid of rebellion. And in hidden corners, servants lit candles and whispered her name, Leora. David and Leora returned to their quarters exhausted, yet their bond felt stronger than steel. You were brave, David said softly. Leora shook her head, her golden eyes glistening. No, I was terrified, but you were beside me. That is why I could stand. He smiled faintly. Then we'll keep standing, together. Weeks later, the war ended. Miras IV was declared free territory. Servants were given the choice to stay or leave. Many chose freedom. Some chose new paths. Some, still afraid, chose the old ways. But the difference was simple. They chose. And that was everything. David was offered medals, honors, even promotions. He refused most of them. He did not fight for glory. He had carried one life from fire, and that was enough. Instead, he chose to walk beside Leora into an uncertain future. One evening, under the quiet stars of a liberated world, they stood together. The air was cool, the sky wide and endless. Leora looked at him, her voice soft but certain. When you carried me, I thought I was a burden. But now I know the truth. I was not a weight. You were showing me how to stand. David's chest tightened. He reached for her hand, and she did not hesitate to take it. No, he said gently. You were never a burden. You were the reason I kept walking. They stood in silence, hand in hand, two small lives against an endless sky. But their choice, their bond, was louder than any fleet, stronger than any empire. Because sometimes, the greatest power in the galaxy is not found in weapons or armies, but in the simple act of saying, you matter. And that truth, once spoken, can never be unspoken. The galaxy would argue for years, would fight, would bleed, would change. But no matter how many voices rose in anger or fear, the image remained. A soldier carrying a maid through fire. A maid, standing in the council and speaking her name. Two lives choosing each other. It began with a single act. It ended with hope that could never be chained again.